Hello, and welcome to the Bold Leadership Story Show, where we talk about the experiences shaping exceptional lives. And I've got an exceptional man with me today. I'm so excited that he's joining me on the show, Mr. Mike Muhney. And Mike is particularly important to me in my life, and he's just learning this now after 40 some years. But I purchased a software that he and Pat Sullivan, his co-creator, developed back in the late 80s.
Mid
And
80s.
I'm sorry,
Mid 80s.
mid 80s. Okay,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
85, 86.
Yeah.
And they created this software that's completely revolutionized the software industry and the sales industry, and created a multi-billion dollar worldwide industry in and of itself. And it's a very rare thing to have someone who is still alive that has this credit, this achievement to their credit. And so, like, for example, ACT, ACT exclamation point, was the very first customer relationship management software developed, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So, and now, for example, one of the companies that spawned was Salesforce. Would you say that?
Yes, for
And
sure.
just
I consider
Salesforce.
that one of my great grandchildren.
Okay, yeah, it's like that's one of your progeny, right?
Yeah.
So that company in 2022 did almost $23 billion in sales. Just think about that. Just that one company, and that this whole industry has grown, and you started that. You're like the progeny is just astounding. How does that feel?
You don't realize it at the time when we were in that era, of course, since we were essentially first on the block with what I'll call a pre-structured architected product. In other words, not a do-it-yourself, in my home with this, D-base and writing my own little routine. Uh,
Hmm.
there were a bunch of those out there, but nobody had done what we had done before. And so you don't really think of it that way, Jim, as I reflect back on it, or you just reflected back on it.
Hmm.
But I will tell you, fast forward today, the fact that ACT is, 40 million users plus, and now it's, what is it? It's 36 years on the market. I mean, how many software products can claim to still be on the market after 36 years? I mean,
Oh yeah.
Lotus is gone. WordPerfect is gone. All these big names, and some of which were public companies, they're gone. And ACT has survived. Obviously, it created a lot of competition, and it's on its fifth owner right now. And the dilution of the vision is long gone, right? But
Hmm.
people don't want to give up ACT that are using it because they've got so much valuable information in it with, extensive, I mean, talking years and years, 20, 30 years of notes and histories on people, right? So yeah, that's the current owner of the product. But it's a little bit, it's overburdened, I will say, in many ways. But I'm proud of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what I love about it too is that you created it and you rode with it, you grew it, and then you exited. I love that because that's like a nice cha-ching, and it kept going. And I don't know if you feel any angst about where it's at now, and if you'd hung in there longer, would that have been worth it? But
Well, I will tell you, and Pat and I are frequently and regularly in touch. As a matter of fact, we're working on something together right now, but um, we both regret selling the company. We should have gone public,
hmm,
and we would have been Salesforce long before Salesforce as far as a public company. But that's, there are reasons why we sold the company, but reflecting back, we shouldn't have, would have, I'd probably still be involved with it, quite honestly, because I love it. It's my child. I love it that much.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you've established yourself now as a relationship expert. You've maintained that. It seems like that idea of meaningful relationships has been a common thread throughout your whole career. And I wanted to ask you, in its essence, for you, what is a meaningful relationship? How do you characterize that?
I'll answer it this way. And obviously, I do a lot of public speaking. There was a social scientist, and I have his report somewhere in my cabinets here, done about, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, where they sought to define what constitutes a real relationship. I mean, a real relationship. We all
Yeah.
have transactional relationships, and that's just part of life and business. Nothing wrong with those, right? But
Mhm.
if you're talking about a real relationship, one that has sustainability, here's what they concluded were the four elements necessary for it to truly be a real relationship. Underscore the word real. I'm going to add a fifth one because I think they forgot one. And
Okay.
I'm not a social scientist, but I have my own opinion. So here's what
I'm
it is.
taking notes.
Okay. The one that everybody would answer if I were to ask them, what do you think is part of a real relationship? They would come up with the word trust, right? So certainly it's a trusting relationship. And these obviously are two-way streets on every one of these four items. And the fifth one that I'll suggest, the time you spend together, the intensity of the time you spend together. I mean, look at today's world where, you go to a restaurant, you see friends or family, kids and parents sitting together and they're all on their phones, not even talking with each other. So they're
Yeah.
spending time, but they're not, there's no intensity of that time. So trust, time, intensity. But here's where it starts to really get more profound. Reciprocity. And a perfect example is, let's say that, I've known you for a couple of years, Jim. I lived in your neighborhood, and I've got season tickets to, one of the professional sports teams, and hey, you want to come? I got an extra ticket. You want to come with me? And you always go, I would love to come with you, Mike, and we have a great time. And, you might buy me a beer or whatever. But after a long period of time, maybe even a short period of time, it occurs to me, you never invite me to your home, to nothing. There's no reciprocity, right? And so reciprocity really is an essential ingredient of a real relationship. So those are the four that the social scientists defined and analyzed in their research. The one that I would propose is also evidence of a real relationship, and it's one that could be even hidden at times, is the word consideration. So for example, let's say that, you and I had lunch together and, you were sharing some very personal things with me, whatever it might be. Maybe, you were diagnosed with cancer, or somebody in your family had an issue. It doesn't matter. You shared something personal with me.
Mhm.
Whether it's the next day, the next month, 6 months later, even if we don't frequently talk, let's say I walk by, I don't know, I read an article on the internet that is precisely about that very thing you were talking to me about. And I click on that link and I send you an email, or I buy you that magazine or book and I send it to you, or I call you up and tell you got to go see this. Without you even knowing about it, Jim, I was considering you even though you weren't with me, right? You're in my mind, your thoughts, and now my actions to, again, give evidence to a real relationship. So that's my opinion of what constitutes a real relationship. And so now, if
Okay.
you then say, well, how do you build a software product around that? Now, obviously, we didn't know those elements back then, but if you look at what ACT did, right, it certainly implemented each and every one of those items.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's from my experience. I went from an engineer position. I decided in my youthful exuberance to go from engineering into sales. So, and I had no idea what I was doing. And all I thought about was, okay, well, I'm going to solve these problems for these people and they're going to buy from me. That was my total focus.
Sure.
And
Sure.
and it wasn't until I found ACT, it was like a godsend. It's like the angels were singing when I finally saw, wow, this is so cool, because it helped me to put the pieces together that I was missing. And actually and I followed it. I just jumped in and said, okay, well, these guys who built this obviously know something about selling. So I'm going to follow this, even though part of it was uncomfortable for me, because I was really good at being an engineer, but I wasn't good at building relationships. But it told me what to do to get that done. And it was building the trust, it was creating that, that spending some time with people, it's like you say, and having that, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So building that likability, the predictability, somebody who comes in and says, okay, well, I'm going to be your guy and I want to build my trust. Give me a chance to earn your business and build that relationship that way. And that finally worked. I went from being, from zero to hero in that first year. I didn't close any new deals until it was 11 and a half months. And then within 30 days, I closed, I think, 12 new accounts. And they all just boom, 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 boom. They all landed. And then that business grew from, I think it was a $300,000 book of business in the territory I was in. And we grew it to over $5 million within 3 years.
Wow.
So it was just taking those basic concepts and just doing the simple but important things and building those relationships was really where it all kicked off, because I was doing all the work, but I wasn't building the relationships, and ACT helped me do that. I'm excited, you could tell, because that was like such a big thing for me. And it's fun to be able to tell you. You probably heard it a million times, but.
Well, in a very humble response to you, and I truly mean that, I can't tell you how many times people have literally said to me, you changed, or not you, ACT changed my life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's a very common phrase, Pat, and I continue to this day to hear. Unfortunately, people say I used to use ACT, right? The current company long ago, and even the prior companies that owned it after we sold it, never had this. They lost the soul of ACT, in my opinion.
Yeah, I stuck with it for a long time, and after you sold it, and a couple times it got and I tried to hang with it, but I had to move. I was like, dang, I can't do this anymore. But the original program was insanely good.
Yeah, but people, when we look at how excited you are, Jim, after all of these years, how long you used it, and you're talking about it like you just discovered it. That there was that indescribable element of ACT that just, I don't know, elevated people's view of themselves and their opportunities and their results, and the extent of their network. And those things are contagious when you start to talk to people. And so our users, especially the early ones, of course, were basically our default sales force, if you will, that we didn't have to pay. They paid us to buy the product, right? But they were out there promoting it like you couldn't market it any better than that. Word of mouth, as we all know, is the best form of marketing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you call yourself the underdog. You're the and I respect you. I've been watching some of your videos and stuff, and looking at, who is Mike Muhney? And Mike is an old school underdog sales guy. And I love that. Because that's kind of my thing. I came from, I'm pretty humble, but it was, I had no business being where I was, but I ended up, because of this, it's like I was struggling to become a salesperson from an engineer. So somebody told me, okay, well, start reading books about success and learn how to be successful. So, okay. So I picked up Tommy Hopkins, Sales Success. Amazing. So that helped me. That was one big leap. And then, okay, then Norman Vincent Peale, and then, who was it? Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and Zig Ziglar and all the greats, all the classic guys, and just absorbing all of that. It's like, and I started selling, and it's like, how do I do all this? How do I get all this done? And I was trying to do it manually and trying to get to the point where I could actually start managing a territory that had, 300 companies in it. And I was struggling because I was dealing with all this manual stuff. And then ACT came along and it was like, boom. So I went down and bought this little laptop DOS, thing, and cost me, I think, $1,000. And I put it in, I put the disk in. It was a actual, I think it was a floppy. Would it have been a floppy disk?
Not likely. By that time, when you bought ACT in '89, it came on the market on April 1st. Easy day to remember, April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1987.
Okay.
And those first two releases were the floppy disk, 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. But your version in '89, that was 3.5 inch diskettes.
Okay. So I put the right. So I put the 3.5 inch diskette in there that still had a floppy in it, I think.
Yeah.
But and then and I started loading in contacts. You have to type them in, right? And so I put the laptop in the office on top of the steel case file cabinets. And this is the inner sanctum of the company, right? And so I'm sitting there, I got the file cabinets open and I'm typing in, I'm taking files out and I'm typing stuff into this laptop computer. People are looking at this like, what are it? They thought I was stealing company secrets. And it's like, they got really pissed off and they called me into the, on the carpet up to the top guy. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? Are you stealing company secrets? And I was like, no. And then I showed him this program and ACT and this vision that, I learned from what this could all do for me. And it was like the angels were singing again. It's like, oh, this is amazing. So then, of course, after that, they let me go, So it was, but I almost got fired that day.
Wow. Don't you wish you had a video of that encounter?
Oh, yeah. It was great.
Yeah. I bet
Fantastic.
that played itself out, thousands and thousands of times.
Yeah, it's definitely you changed the world for sure.
No, I mean, it did. ACT did change the world. But again, I wanted to underscore, Pat and I, obviously we wanted to be successful, but we had no concept that it was going to change the world in the capacity that it did, and was evident that it was doing so fairly early on after its release.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. So what was your I've always been curious, something like that, a software product that is so revolutionary. Nobody done it before. I mean, I think in my mind, I'm thinking I was channeling that. Back in the, mid 80s, I was thinking, I need this. I need a program that will do this, but it just didn't exist. And I think, it's like, that's why I was so excited when it came along. It's like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted. What was it that was going through your and Pat's mind that gave you this idea that you had some real guts to take a step out this direction? And I know from your story, you guys were almost ready to throw in the towel before it came up, but obviously this idea was percolating at some point.
Well,
where did that come from? What was the genesis of the idea?
Okay, I'll have to, there's no quick answer to that. I'll have to tell you kind of a little story of the unfolding of it that led us to the precise answer to your question. Mm-hmm. So Pat and I were both, sales guys. I obviously was fortunate to be hired by IBM back in the mainframe era, and you had to take an IQ test before they would even interview you. And if you didn't pass it, of course, you couldn't be interviewed no matter what your grade point average was in college, right?
Right.
I obviously passed the IQ test. I probably just passed it, but I passed it. And then I went through 3 days. Think about this. I went through 3 days, 2 interviews per day. So 6 interviews, 2 hours each.
Wow.
Okay? So I had 12 hours of interviews across 6 IBM managers before they all concluded that they wanted to extend the job offer to me. Okay, I obviously passed all that.
So back up a sec. With IBM back in at that time, IBM was like the best of the best, the creme de la creme
They
of
were.
companies.
No, they were. I mean, if you were in, and of course, most people were afraid of computers. Computers were never seen. They were these big mainframes in, cold air conditioned raised floor rooms that only, propeller heads knew how to work, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it was a very mysterious, and think about in today's world where you and I both, and everybody that's watching this or will watch it, right now, this whole thing called artificial intelligence is beginning to unfold. And we're a little curious about it, but we're also a little skeptical and possibly even fearful about it. Well, that same kind of attitude was back then about mainframes, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so if you got into IBM at that time, 400,000 employees, it was lifetime employment. That's no longer the case, hasn't been for a long time, but it was when I was hired.
Right.
And so they made it very difficult to become an IBMer. So once you were an IBMer, wow, I mean, you were the best of the best, but they didn't just let you assume that. They continued to train you towards continuing to improve upon that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I had to go to sales school, as we all did, and the way IBM worked back then, every sales trainee hired in that calendar month across all of America constituted your class. And now that class was going to get together for weeks on end up in Rochester, Minnesota, Atlanta, whatever, and bunk together and do all-nighters together for 6 months. Now, the older IBMers, long before me, the sales training was started off being 2 years of training before you were given your territory. Then they reduced it to 1 year. Then they reduced it to 6 months. I was in the 6 months era of IBM, but
Okay.
nonetheless, imagine 6 months of sales training today, and you're paying somebody before you even give them a territory. Most people won't do that today. So I had, and we were ranked and graded. I had 66 students in my class, and I ranked number 6. So I just made the top 10%.
Uh-huh.
I had a great career at IBM, but what they taught, and I'll defer getting into this until later if you want me to elaborate on it, because I want to answer your question. But they taught us principles in sales school, more importantly than sales technique of how to sell.
Okay. So that was a differentiator about IBM.
Exactly. So the DNA that they deposited in me and nurtured in me and trained me on and graded me on, and upon which I had a very successful IBM career, all goes back to those principles that they taught us. And they weren't necessarily what you would consider sales principles. They were personal principles, principles of integrity, etc. Principles of how you saw yourself and how you carried yourself. And so that was, here I'm a young, just out of college, my first job, right? My first full-time career job. And I'm absorbing all this. I'm not even aware of the impact they're making on me. I'm just like a sponge taking it all in. Well, now, and Pat was also a sales guy. He got a job with his wife's uncle in Chicago. We were both from Chicago, who owned a paper manufacturing company. So anything, I mean, cardboard boxes and annual reports, packaging for food, anything that had to do with paper. Pat was a sales guy to go sell more paper in his territory, right?
Okay.
But so we were both sales guys. We just so happened, serendipitously, because we went to different universities. He went to Eastern Illinois. I went to University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. We moved into the same apartment complex 2 doors apart. And so we got to know each other, and we went to the same church together, and we both realized we're both sales guys. So we had a lot in common, make it short. So now fast forward. So here's 2 sales guys, etc., a lot in common. And as the PC industry started to emerge, Pat and I were best friends, and we always said to each other, wouldn't it be great to have our own company together, quit our jobs with these big companies and work together? Wouldn't that be fun? So
hang on a second. This PC, you just kind of blew past this. The PC came out. That at that time
The
was,
PC came out in, I think, if I remember correctly, I might be off by a year or so here, but the PC, the original IBM PC came out in 83, if I remember correctly. Now, Apple came out before that in 75, but Apple was not seen as a business product back then at all, anything but, right? So the IBM PC is what truly changed and commoditized, if you will, computer technology to the common person.
right. That's what Microsoft, their DOS program was
Correct.
built around, that hardware platform. And back
Right.
then it was, you were either a hardware company or a software company. It was none of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, a lot of if you go back to the mainframe era, what did mainframes do? Well, they did accounting. So payroll, spreadsheets, they did anything numbers related. So quite predictable. They also, were kind of a document creator, if you will, of any and all sorts. So let's call that word processing, right?
Right.
So if you look at, and then there were databases, right? I mean, that you could build tables on to store information in that you then might become a spreadsheet or might allow you some analytical capability. So fundamentally, the mainframe computer, in my opinion, obviously it did a lot, but fundamentally it did, numbers, words, and database functions, right? Well, that now extended down to this thing called the PC. So now you got this company called Lotus 123, and they were the king of spreadsheets. Excel is today, Lotus is gone. WordPerfect at the time was the word processing king. And then Ashton Tate, the public company, was DBase 2. That was a database where I could buy a database, and even though I'm not a programmer, I could kind of do a little bit of what I'll call pseudo programming, and they could give me tools to help create a table for me to have a to-do list, for example.
Right. Yeah.
So there were a lot of people that were doing that with DBase. Okay. And so that might have been a little bit of the genesis of where things were going to head, but nobody saw it yet.
Right.
All right. So
did you guys see that at all? I mean,
no.
were you? No. Okay.
No, not then. So here's what happened. Now I'm getting closer. So Pat ultimately became a salesperson at a computer store, retail store, because back then you had to go to either a computer land, a business land, an entree, microage, just to name a few, where you bought your computer and the software and got your training. Okay? Right. Those are all long gone. And there was no Best Buy back then or anything like that. There was no internet, right?
Right.
So Pat was a sales guy at a computer store, and people would come in and say, I'm a manager at Texas Instruments. I need to buy 25 computers. Can you help me configure it? Here's what I need. I need 10 of these and 5 of these. And so Pat, got tired of doing this by hand like everybody else was doing. And Lotus had a product called Symphony that he learned, and he created a little configurator. So now he could take the inventory in the store. He could punch in the quantities you wanted. He could line item a discount, back solve a margin, but then add up the total of what that quote would be, but make sure that it was not a quote at a loss. In other words, he wasn't leaving anything on the table. He didn't give something. He didn't quote a price that was less than what the actual cost was to the store. Right?
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
And he would print it out and give that copy to the prospect and say, we'll stand by this quote for 30 days. Now, back then that those people would go to their, his competitors and say, say the same thing. I want to buy 25 of these. And they would say, that's probably $60,000. Well, which one made you feel more confident? The one, no, I want to know the exact price, right? Okay, that's number one. Number two, it made Pat, as our salesperson, look more professional, right? He was using technology to sell technology, right? As opposed to, why don't you use what you're selling? I mean, what, you can't do this on a computer yet? Well, no, I can't, but you need one. I don't, you do, even though I sell them, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So
that was really innovative of him to be able to take that on, because they probably didn't train for that.
No, not at all. That was just Pat on his own. So the salespeople in the store got to see how easy it was for Pat to configure a quote, and he was sending out more quotes than all of them combined, right? So he started letting them use that product. Well, it was that Pat, I said earlier, Pat and I always wanted to have our own company together. So that's when he said, Mike, I think we've got something where I could quit my job and you and I can start a company and we can sell this product, right? And Pat's not a programmer. Symphony was like DBase, where you could puzzle pieces together, so to speak. I mean, there was a little bit of programming, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like a real programmer, a real developer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. We quit our jobs and we started a company, and we called it Conductor Software. Why Conductor? Well, because that product was written in Symphony, right? Okay. And he called the product Quote Pro. I changed the name of the product to Margin Maker. Quote Pro was like a feature, but I wanted the benefit to be the underlying value, if you will. So Margin Maker said, "Oh, I'm going to make margins."
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to quote, I can do quotes. Right. One's boring, one's kind of exciting. Right.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So there's a lot more that I obviously have no time to go into. Excuse me. So to cut to the chase, we raised $100,000 from an angel out of Boston. We were now in Dallas, Fort Worth. We both serendipitously again had job transfers down to Texas back within a year of each other. So we started the company down here, and a friend of my brother's had a friend up in Boston who, he told him about me, and I've got this contractor that's working on my mansion. He's got a brother that's doing something in software, and his friend in Boston said, "Well, find out what they're doing. I might be interested in it." You couldn't have predicted this. You couldn't have, dialed. Yeah. There was no way to find this person. It serendipitously happened, Jim. And so he contacted us and asked for a business plan. We didn't know what a business plan was, but we put one together. Make a long story short, he invested $100,000 for Margin Maker for 7% of the company.
Wow.
Now, Pat and I, we pretty much had now, in fact, had exhausted a good portion of all of our credit cards. We were self-funding and making sales, but not at the pace where we were going to be able to stay in business, right? So we had accumulated debt when we got that $100,000. So within 3 months of that $100,000, we'd either paid off debt and or started paying ourselves nominal salary. We spent $85,000 in 3 months. We only had $15,000 left, and it was at that point. This is mid June of 1986.
Wow. Okay.
Right. We both literally said to each other, I can picture it as if it happened yesterday, "This dog ain't gonna hunt. Margin Maker is dead. We gotta fold out the business." And the angel up in Boston was pretty much a passive investor. He kind of left us alone, but he was going to come down near the middle to end of July, right? So we were going to have to fess up to him and say, we've exhausted your money and the product failed. Sorry. But be willing to give him $15,000 left. And so, but Pat and I didn't want to go out of business, but you begin to explore in your mind and your heart and your desperation, and you say, is there anything we can come up with? What can we do? And we exhausted our list of things that we thought were options open to us.
Mm-hmm.
But here's another serendipitous or providential component to how ACT was born, created and born. One of the principles IBM taught me was always call the CEO level first. Even if you're assigned to the General Motors account and there's already 400 IBMers on that account, your job as a new salesperson attached to that company is to contact the CEO. Now, at that size of a company, not likely you're going to see him, but he'll delegate you down to somebody who will see you because the CEO wants that person to see you, right? So always start at the top. So I always started at the top in every prospecting call I made, including trying to sell Margin Maker. Now, Margin Maker was designed only for these computer stores, specifically for the salespeople. of which the store owner, franchisees would benefit by they'd be more productive and profitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had a focused but a limited market. One of the companies across the country of computer stores, 54 of them, was headquartered right here in Dallas, a suburb called Richardson, Texas, north of North Dallas.
Yep.
So I obviously made it a purpose to call on the CEO. It took the effort to get to that CEO. That's an interesting story too. But nonetheless, I ultimately got to the CEO. When he first met me, when I walked into his office, he got up from behind his desk, Jim. This is exactly how it happened. He had a very deep voice, very stern look, like he was a general or an admiral in the military, right? And he was about 3 or 4 inches taller than me. So he got up from behind his desk. I walked up to him, shook his hand, kind of looking up to him. And while he's holding my hand, very sternly looking me in the eyes, he said, "How the hell did you get in here to meet me? Like, you're a sales guy and I'm the CEO, right?"
Yeah.
And I told you IBM taught us principles of selling and how to connect with people. And my immediate response to him off the cuff, and this is, he reminded me that this is what I said to him, because we had lunch many, 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 many decades later, right, together. And he told me the story again. And he said, "You remember what you said to me, Mike, when I said that to you?" And I said, "No, John, what did I say?" And he said, "Mr. Patel, I know your executive secretary better than you do, and she let me in." That stern admiral military approach. He started laughing and the ice was melted. I did show him the product. He did tell me to go to purchasing, but he also said, "Keep in touch with me and let me know how it's going. I kind of like this product." Wow, that was like manna from heaven to hear that from a CEO that could write the check, right?
Yeah.
All right, it's important for you to know that, because here's why. So now Pat and I have exhausted our options with the angel coming down and almost out of money.
Hey, you guys are sweating bullets because you burned out. Your runway is about gone. You got 15 grand left, and
Correct.
you have 100 grand, and you burned through that in like 3 months, and you're
Correct.
like got your tail between your legs, going, oh crap, we and you're kind of embarrassed. I'm thinking at this point.
No, we were. I mean, who likes to go to somebody else, especially when they voted for you, put trust in you, and wrote a check to you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you have to tell them you failed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was raised, so was Pat, very athletic, very competitive by nature, right?
Sure.
So failure, we always wanted to win. I mean, that's what business is, right? I wanted to win. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was a fearful thing that we were going to have to admit failure, and ashamedly so, because it had to do with a lot of money. It wasn't that we broke our word or we missed a meeting. It was we lost $100,000 of your money, and to us, 100,000 might have been $1 billion, because that was a lot of money to us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's a lot of money now, but back then it was even more, because like 100 grand now, it's like probably 500 grand.
Right. Well, it just so happened that during this time of our saying we don't know what to do. I mean, this didn't happen all in the matter of a day. We had a couple of weeks to go. Is there anything new? Can we come up with anything? Well, during that period, that very brief period, a weekly computer edition called Computer Reseller News.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that came out pertinent to the computer reseller industry.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Well, they had an annual, every year, they had their annual edition of the 25 most influential people in the entire PC industry. Okay. Bill Gates, of course, being one of them, Jim Manzi from Lotus, etc. Well, guess who one of those 25 were? John Pertell, the CEO that I sought to seek and meet and did, and got his, So when we got that issue right in front of us, it was like, oh my gosh, look at John is one of the 25 most influential people, and I know him. Why don't we call him up and see if we can go talk to him, and maybe he can tell us what we can do, right? Or maybe, finally order 54 products for each of those 54 stores, something, right?
Keep us in business.
Yeah. So I contacted John. He let me call him John at that point, from Mr. Patel. So I contacted John. I said, "John, we're in trouble. Can we come and talk to you? We need some advice." So sure enough, we went and sought him out. We told him everything we could, why Margin Maker failed. I mean, everything we tried to come up with. We were exhausted with every item that we could think of, and we concluded the only one left was to give the angel investor who didn't know this was a failure yet, give him the 15,000 back that we had left and just shut the business down. And so here's what John, he just quietly listened like a good CEO, mature, CEO. And this is what he said to us after we were done. Guys, you two guys are smart guys. Come on. Before you throw in the towel, next week, or maybe whatever it was, the next few days, is July 4th, a holiday. Why don't you go have an 8 until noon, he was very specific, 8 until noon, a 4-hour brainstorm session, and see if you can come up with another idea before you throw in the towel. Well, we can still afford coffee and toast. So Pat and I took his advice. We were at a hotel restaurant south of DFW Airport with pencil and paper, and we were sitting in the booth at 8 o'clock. And we did say to each other, we are sitting here until noon, no matter what. This is it. It's do or die. So now we established some criteria. We said, well, okay, now we have a blank sheet of paper. We're not trying to improve Margin Maker. Margin Maker's a failure. We got a blank sheet, so we can create anything. Let's start from a blank sheet of paper. And this is what we said. Why don't we attempt to start with something that we both need? What do we need? Is there anything we need, right? And right next to us, we were power daytimer users, as everybody was back then, a paper system, because laptops were just this brand new thing, and they were all pretty bad at that point, and most people didn't even have a PC yet, much less a laptop. So make a long story short.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Yeah.
That idea, that direction that you decided to take, you could have gone in a billion different directions, but you decided, you guys are salespeople. You see, so you have this ego that says, okay, I want to create something that I want. And I think intuitively, most people would have said, well, what would the market want? Who would want to buy something we could build? But instead, you guys went the other direction and decided, well, what do we want? And I think that was a key there from my view. I remember I used to do a lot of work at Apple Computer, and I did some work with them on the, in the inner sanctum of their product development groups. And that was one of their keys too. It's like, we don't care what the market wants. We're going to build stuff we think is cool. And anyway, that was, I think, a key. So it's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, it was key. Although again, just about everything I'm telling you, Jim, it's not like we were these insightful genius.
Right. Yeah, no, you're just going with the flow, what we have in your heart.
It was gut instinct.
Yeah, I love that.
It was desperation. It was, if I use it, maybe somebody else will use it, right?
Yeah,
but right. So there's nothing wrong with saying, what does the market need? I mean, obviously, a lot of products have been built when you look, but that wasn't us. It was like
kind of wishy-washy, though. I like your guts. You took the
right,
the chutzpah. You got.
Well, if you eat your own dog food, you can talk about your own dog food and all the benefits of it, right? So a lot of the problems with the salespeople at all these computer stores, just to focus on them, was they weren't using the computers. They didn't even own one in many cases. They sold them. Mm-hmm. I never owned a mainframe, but I sold them, right? So they sold PCs, but they didn't even use one. And so they didn't have any passionate, insightful, intensive understanding of how this could change your life, how it could help you be more productive, how it could help you do more with less, right? All of those kinds of things. So, if Pat and I could come up with something that we did need, that we were going to use, probably convince people that who were like us, that they could use it too, right?
Good logic.
And so that's really where it started. Then we set aside a couple of other guardrails on what this 4-hour was going to comprise of. So we said, okay, you and I are both sales guys, so neither one of us are the experts here, right? And I did have to learn to program at IBM too, 5 different languages, but I wasn't a programmer at IBM, but I had to know programming and I had to write some programs
Okay,
for it.
that was a missing part in my mind.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that later, but I'm glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because that's a big part of the process
Yeah,
too,
matter
is
of fact, I wrote
understanding at least.
a routine in APL, which stood for a programming language, a program invented by Ken Iverson, Dr. Ken Iverson out of Harvard, and he basic. There were all these, basic and COBOL, and he wanted something that started with A. I know that everybody has
Of course,
rationale.
Acme,
So
right?
yeah, right, Acme. So he
Be
started a
first in the
program.
phone book.
He wanted to call it APL, which stood for a programming language.
Okay.
And
Fun.
I met him personally. But anyway, I wrote an APL routine product program that the Holiday Inn reservation system used for a while. Obviously, not anymore in not many years, decades, but at that time they did, right? So
Right.
you'd have to have an understanding of programming. Is all I'm trying to say.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
and Pat had an understanding of programming with Symphony, but we were both sales guys, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so we said, okay, neither one of us are experts here, so let's give each other veto power. What did that mean? Well, if you think of a bell-shaped curve and two sales guys, we probably 70% of what we might conceive, we probably already say, yeah, that's cool. I need that. But then there's always the periphery, and if I suggested or he suggested something at the periphery, let's call it, that was kind of esoteric, if the other person said, nah, I veto that. End of subject. Stop trying to sell. Don't have your feelings hurt. Just get on with it. So we set these, guidelines, and we also said to each other that it had to have a concept that we created or defined at that point called useful use. Whatever we came up with had to have useful use. It didn't just needed to be another feature to add an abundance of features just so that you could say, well, we do that. No. If the feature wasn't going to be useful to this purpose and this idea, then we're not going to allow it. So it had to have useful use along with veto power. And we also said this, if we can come up with a product, wouldn't it be great if it was the kind of product where we could automate? This is what we defined as well. Automate the automators. What did that mean? All the salespeople already out in the world at all these computer stores selling computers, if we could automate them with this idea, they would be a default sales force because they would finally have a product they themselves would use, understand, and be able to give a thorough, confident demonstration of. Nothing worse than having a salesperson give you a demonstration of a product and they fumble through it because they really don't know it because they don't really use it. And now they're embarrassed, or you can tell that they're lying, all sorts of things, right? But if we could come up with an idea that automated the automators, we would create this vast sales organization by default. That was our criteria. Now we began, okay, let's begin. And
that's almost providential. It's like you guys came up with this on the fly.
Yeah.
And created these boundaries for yourself that built this, those are the building blocks that helped you create this.
Well, you don't, I mean, think about it, Jim. You don't build anything. Like, think of a home, it doesn't matter. You don't build a car, nothing first without an architecture, a blueprint of it. What's the identity of this thing going to be? What is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? If we're going to build a 100-story skyscraper, we better have this kind of a substructure foundationally to support something. You got to think of this before you even begin building, right? So that's why we knew we needed to set some guidelines on our discussion, from which that was our foundation. Otherwise, we were just throwing shit at the wall. Excuse my language. We were just hoping something would stick, right? Yeah. We had to have, okay, does that fit now where we're headed? And so that's why we did it.
Okay.
Again, nobody taught us this. I never had a college course or a high school course that taught me that. It was just common sense, gut instinct that Pat and I had. That's all. Okay.
So
Nothing more than
valuable.
that. That's what
So
I'm saying.
valuable.
We're just regular guys. We're not these
Yeah.
geniuses with MBAs out of Harvard or Yale. But, heck with that. You don't need that kind of stuff to succeed. Matter of fact,
Right.
those would be hurtful to you, right? How many of those people have ever really created something successful? Probably a lot less than the common person who had a real need that they came up with and did something with, right?
Amen, brother. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's why, going back to your underdog, I have always viewed myself as the underdog. People have said, I'm never going to be, my calling isn't to be a physicist or a doctor or a neurosurgeon or the head of a fortune. Okay, that's not Mike Muhney. Never could be, never would be. But that doesn't mean I can't do something special, So I relate to the common person much better than I do the elites. And I've, of course, in my career, met a lot of elites. And, they're interesting to deal with. I much prefer the common person because I come from a blue collar family, the real salt of the earth kind of people. That's who my heart has always been for. And Pat's from a blue collar family, salt of the earth kind of people, Midwestern values, if you will. So,
Good stuff.
yeah, so we look, make a long story short, we kind of looked at the state timer and said, that's interesting that if we could only automate a lot of what that does, and here's all the bad things about it. And, there's a lot of good, but here's all the bad things about it. They're unproductive things. If you copious notes in a day timer, especially with a long-term relationship. Yeah.
I still got my day timer.
Yeah.
Right here. This is what I was using before I got ACT.
Everybody, we were too. Day timer.
I still use it.
Yeah. But the problem is if you write, so you could write down, you've got a meeting next week at 3:00 on Friday with so-and-so. And if you took notes on that page, that's fine. But now you're on to next month's, portion or next year even, and you've got all those stacked in your drawer and your notes are compiled about all those meetings with that one individual or that group.
Right.
So Pat and I thought, you know what? The paper systems are about the activities, but all of those activities are regarding things for or with people. Why don't we turn the coin? What could we do from a relationship standpoint, the people standpoint, upon which all these things are attached? So all we did was we saw something on one side of the coin, we flipped the coin, and now it kind of was that aha moment. And now we were onto something. And to make a long story short, Jim, we started saying, well, wow, yeah, if it could keep all the notes in history and if it could, have them aggregated in chronological sequence, most recent through the oldest. And if you could have, user fields where I could customize it. So if I'm an engineer or a lawyer, I could define it with a fixed structure of what we want to build that they could do that with. So this is the original napkin that we left.
Wow.
This is the original napkin that I left that morning with from the Pat and I had.
You still have it. That is so cool.
Yeah. People have told me I should put, this in plastic and encase it, but it is more fun to actually hold this document of what we started to draw up as the, nominal menu structure, if you will, right? Okay. So now we were off and running. We left that breakfast. We stayed there till noon because we continued to work on, well, what would it do, right? The menu structure is the rudimentary menu structure. But when we left, we knew we were onto something. We were excited. I mean, I'm not even demonstrating the level of excitement we had at that moment because at that moment we were near death. I'm not near death right now as far as business stuff.
Right.
Back then we were. So we were exceptionally excited, right?
Yeah.
And we said, okay, we've got 3 weeks before the angel investor. His name was John McNair. So we had two Johns here. Mr. Patel, John Patel, the CEO, and John McNair out of Boston, the angel investor. So we thought we've got 3 weeks before John McNair comes down. We've got to start to architect this product. And so for the next 3 weeks, here's all the things we had to complete the entire menu structure. And here is the actual menu structure that I drew. And Pat worked with me too, but Pat was kind of supporting some of our margin maker customers. And so he was sitting right next to me in our tiny little 10 by 10 office cubicle, right? And I was concentrating on, okay, we got this idea. I got to come up with this menu structure. Pat, would cross-reference it. But anyway, this is what I drew on a marker board and then put on paper. So I taped 4 pieces of graph paper together, and this is the entire menu structure of what was going to become ACT. And I codenamed it YES. Coming from IBM, that was an acronym that stood for yes, everybody sells. I don't care what you do, everybody's a salesperson. I don't care if you're a pastor, a lawyer, it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a neighbor. I either like you as my neighbor or I don't, right? Everybody's selling themselves at all times. So I codenamed it yes, and here, these are, you had to get down to the pixel level. Here are all of the architectural documents on big, normal old computer paper.
Yeah.
This is the architecture of what became ACT that we had to do before it could start to be programmed. And we wanted to get as much of that ready as we could before John McNair came down to tell him we had a plan B. Okay. So we worked on it. John McNair comes down about 3 weeks later. We pick him up at the airport. We go out to lunch and have a normal lunch. But then at the end, Pat and I knew we have to fess up, tell him that Margin Maker failed. And so we finally said, John, we've got some bad news for you, but we have some good news too. Which do you want to hear first? And he said, well, what's the bad news? Fortunately, he was a very patient man. We told him why Margin Maker was dead. We answered all of his questions. He said, okay, well, so what's this plan B? Well, okay. And so we got into it. We showed him the menu. We talked about it. You could see the enthusiasm we had, how we were going to, he could use it too. Everybody could use it. And then the moment came where we knew we said enough. It's either his decision now to do a thumbs down, yes, give me my 15,000 back, or a thumbs up. Pat and I didn't anticipate at all, not even close, what he now was about to say. So here's what he finally said. He said, guys, I didn't invest in Margin Maker. I invested in the two of you. And actually, I like this idea better than Margin Maker. And this is what he then said. Do you need any more money?
Whoa!
Oh, Jim, we didn't anticipate that we were going to be offered that as an option from him. We thought he was going to be quite upset, most likely. So, of course, Pat and I didn't have this. Well, if he asked this question, say this. It wasn't an option. We anticipated, so we didn't have any predetermined amount. But simultaneously, Pat and I both excitedly said, yeah, we do. And he said, well, how much? And we said $50,000. The reason we said 50, Pat and I talked about it later. How did you say 50? And is because we had asked for 100. We didn't succeed with it. So we weren't bold enough to ask for enough. We thought, well, 50, right? Okay. So when we said 50,000, John McNair with his sport coat, opened up his sport coat, took his checkbook out of his pocket, right there at the restaurant table, wrote a $50,000 check to us. Wow. Oh my gosh, we had an oxygen tank. We had some life. We weren't over yet, right? All right. So that was a great time with him and an excited time knowing that we had the confidence of the investor. I then called up John Pertell, who told us about a month earlier now to go have this brainstorm breakfast on July 4th.
Okay. And you hadn't talked to him between then and now?
Yeah, no.
So you gave him an update?
Hadn't talked to him at all, right? There was no email back then. So there was none of this, right? So I called up John. John, hey, it's been a while. I want you to know that we got some interesting news. Can we come and tell you what it is? Sure, come on, guys. So Pat and I went to see him and we said, John Pertell, John, you're not going to believe this, but not only did he love the product and he wasn't upset and he let us keep the 15,000, he liked this idea that we're going to share with you so much he wrote us a $50,000 check. We took your advice. We had that breakfast. We sat there for 4 hours. We did come up with an idea, and here's what it is. And when we were done telling him that whole story, this is what he said. He said, you know what? I like that idea too. As a matter of fact, there's 2 other friends of mine that might also be interested in taking a look at this for an investment.
Wow.
Said, why don't you let me organize a meeting at my house later this week in the evening, and you two guys come and give your pitch. He organized the meeting. Pat and I went there. We gave our pitch. And at the end of that meeting, those three men wrote us a total of $400,000 in checks. Oh my gosh, now we really are a going concern. We have life. We're going to stay in business. And now for the next basically 8 months, 7.5, 8 months, we devoted ourselves to programming act. We did have two programmers, Randy and John. And so it was the four of us in a little 10 by 10 cubicle room, in the shape of the smallest plus sign of cubicles. I mean, shoulders basically touched each other.
Yeah.
And actually, I think I have, I think I have a picture here. Oh, yeah, here it is.
You got a shot of the office?
I got a shot of the office that
Oh, that's so cool. That's history right there, baby.
It is. It was so that to get to the back of the office, Pat and I were on the executive side. That meant we had a window. But you could see that's me right there. I had to squeeze to get back.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's what the office looked like. Here is that marker board of the menu structure as it was being worked on.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Here's basically here's what the office looked like. I mean, there was nothing. It was a closet, basically.
Yeah, that's amazing.
See if there's anything. Yeah, and so
there's the entrepreneur right there.
Yeah, and so now the four of us were underway in building this product, and we did finally release it on April 1st, 1987. And I'll close out the answer to that question. So imagine you've created this product. It had, not only did we create a product, and we had to come up with the name ACT too, because it was a code name. Yes, I came up with the name ACT. ACT is really an acronym, but purposely meant to be an acronym that itself was a word. That was my criteria. So 4 months later, I'm out in Silicon Valley, and every day I was calling the office, Pat, how things going? Because sales were, beginning to emerge, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, Mike, go to any store. You got to buy PC Magazine, which was the leader in PC, news, if you will.
Oh yeah, it was a big deal.
And, yeah. So if you were written about in PC Magazine you
were like it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so Pat said, go buy a copy of PC Magazine. There's a great article about ACT in it. So I did, and we made reprints of it. But here's the article. What qualifies as great software? Imagine something written about you called great software. Right? PC
Magazine. That logo, that PC Magazine logo, that was in my world that I grew up in the computer business was, I worked at AST Research. Remember that company?
Yeah, I do. Sure.
I knew Albert Safi and Tom personally, and I worked in their production, and yeah, so yeah, that logo was like, bam, big deal.
Yeah, so sales went up massively as a result of that article, and so obviously we're now beginning to build the company. I think at that point in time we were less than 10 people in the company now.
Wow.
Okay, and we were out calling on these computer reseller stores, but let me take a step back on how the name ACT even now came to be, because it's also important, the serendipityness of how it was unfolded. So I would ACT, well, the product codenamed Yes was now in beta, beginning beta. I was already, so Pat and I, two sales guys, how do you determine who does what in the company? I mean, you're both the co-founders and co-inventors. Who does what? So Pat and I made it very easy, because I was the more classically trained sales guy with IBM, and Pat wasn't. He also had newborn twin daughters at that time. So
oh wow,
he had to be home a lot.
So he was sleep deprived.
Yeah. He said, Mike, why don't you be the outside guy? Or I said it, why don't I be the outside guy and you be the inside guy? So think of operations versus sales and marketing. okay, and the public persona and meeting with people. And just so I was the outside guy. The moment that Yes was going to go outside the door, so to speak, literally and figuratively, that was my area of responsibility. I mean, it's only the two of it. Well, it's the four of us, but two of the guys are programmers. Their job is to program, right? Period.
Right. Yeah.
Finish this product. Let's get it released. So now I'm now beginning to spend a lot of time in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York City, because that's where the hubs of the media, the publications were. And especially New York City was corporate America, right? Headquarters of corporate America.
Sure.
So this new thing was still emerging. They still weren't very good, but you could see they were here to stay. This new thing called a laptop, right? So I read in Computer Reseller News an article previously by a guy in New York City whose business, he was in Midtown Manhattan. He only sold laptop computers to these Fortune 500 companies. He didn't sell PCs, only laptops.
Okay.
Well, laptops meant mobility. So Pat and I we needed a laptop, right? I traveled. I mean, I needed something to take with me, right? So laptops were this cool thing, but they weren't very powerful yet, and they were very expensive. But nonetheless, they were here to stay. So I thought I'm going to call up that guy. And back then, you called information to get a phone number to somebody. Anyway, I got his phone number. His name was Peter O'Connor.
Okay.
And the name of his company was Executive Business Solutions. Okay. I called up Peter. I told him, who are you? Well, I'm Mike Muhney. Blah. We got this. Yeah. Well, what does it do? Well, I said, well, why don't you? Okay, send me a beta. I'll take a look at it. He was very kind of New Yorkish, whatever. So I sent him a beta. I called him, I don't know, a week later, and he said, I've been playing with this. This is pretty interesting. So I scheduled to go up and visit with him. So I was visiting with him a lot during this process because he was beginning to take me to some of his existing clients to give them a preview.
Okay. So he was like a VAR, value-added reseller?
He was priming the pump himself to sell more laptops, his sales force. Right?
Yeah.
I think he had like 15 salespeople.
That was brand new. I remember one of a compact laptop that came out. It was like a suitcase. This thing was like probably weighed 50 pounds.
It was, but it wasn't considered a laptop. It was considered a mobile PC.
A mobile PC, yeah, right.
But there were some true laptops by Toshiba, NEC, Sharp, Grid, Zenith, to name a few. Okay.
I had the Zenith. That's the one that I got.
Yeah, and it had the blue screen. I love the blue screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one too. Zenith gave us laptops. So did Grid, because they wanted us to demonstrate ACT on their machines.
Okay.
Right? That's a whole nother story. But anyway, so one day after many visits with Peter, it was a Friday afternoon. I was going to get back on the plane at LaGuardia to head back to Dallas, Fort Worth that night. And Pat and I had been interviewing companies in the Metroplex here, because back then there was no internet, marketing companies that could help create a name. And we narrowed it down to one company that we really liked, but they said, guys, it's going to cost you $20,000 and we'll come up with a lot of names, but there's no guarantee you're going to like any, but we'll come up with a lot of names. So Pat and I kind of put that under the rug. We didn't want to write a $20,000 check, but we were now getting to the point where we were going to have to write a check if we didn't, come up with a name.
Right.
So I'm sitting having lunch with Peter O'Connor and getting ready to leave for LaGuardia. And he said, Mike, have you come up with a name yet for Yes? And I said, no, Peter, we haven't. He said, well, don't you think you better hurry? I mean, you got to create some brochures and the packaging. And, I said, if I were you, I'd kind of get going on a name. So he motivated me. And I had this beautiful 3.5-hour window on an airplane on American Airlines coming back to Dallas that night. And so sitting by myself in the kind of closing my eyes, I just said, look, I'm going to see if I can come up with a name. If I can't, nobody will know that I tried and failed, but I'm going to see if I can come up with a name. And by the way, I have a finance degree from University of Illinois. I don't have a marketing degree.
Okay.
So I don't have this I wasn't trained or educated academically in marketing.
Right.
Just gut feel. So anyway, I said to myself, again, going back to set criteria, Okay, I got to set some criteria. What is it? Well, if I can come up with a name, I do want it to start with the letter A, because in any future competitive list, I want to be first on the list, right? Number two, if possible, I would like it to be an acronym that itself is a name and that it's one syllable, just if possible, because one syllable is easy to remember. And number three, this was my criteria, sitting with my own thoughts. Number three, if at all possible, I would love for it to be a name that kind of is fun, mischievous, do something, but playful. I mean, it entices you to do something, right? Because I had the passion of what Yes was allowing me to do more productively. So it
Hmm.
had to have that oomph factor, if you will. Okay,
Okay.
so now I have my criteria.
Right.
So I said, okay, on that, if you go back to that menu, so where do I spend most of my time in Yes? Is there any menu word that starts with the letter A that I can at least create that first word by which I get the letter A from? Yes, I spend a lot of time in the action menu. So I didn't see act, I just saw the word action and it started with A. So there's my A, okay? All right, so what word can I concatenate to the A that starts with the letter B? And I tried to go through my knowledge of all the B words I knew, and I couldn't come up with a name that where the acronym would be a word in one syllable. There was no A, B, anything. And I came up with, so I said, okay, I got to go to the C's. I was going to go down the alphabet. Okay, so what does the action menu help me to do? Couldn't come up with a B word. Is there a C word? I finally arrived at the word control. It's helped me to control my time, my activity. There it is. ACT, act, right? Activity control, ACT, right? The exclamation mark was kind of afterwards. But so I was very excited. I got off the plane. My wife met me at the airport and I told her this whole story. And she said, no, you can't have it that way. You have to have a word for each of the letters. So why don't you call it activity control technology? It still was ACT, but it was activity control technology. And that's how the word act came to be. So Monday, I went to the office, that little office I just showed you pictures of.
Hmm.
Pat was there, the two programmers, John Pertel was there. One of the other investors had an executive suite down the hall that we didn't even know until he was an investor. He made a lot of money. He had the exclusive entire middle third of the country. He was the distributor that sold Epson printers.
Oh, wow.
And he sold it and he made millions of dollars. And he was right down the hall. So anyway, he
Huh.
was there too. So I told him this whole story and I finally said, and so the name of the product is ACT. And Jim, here was the across the board look on every one of their faces. Oh, okay. And within an hour, no exaggeration, within an hour, many of them much sooner than that, but within an hour, every one of them came back to me and said, you know what? That is a cool name. I mean, it just kind of ACT, right? And so that's how ACT was formed.
Oh,
Right
beautiful.
now I'm kind of going to open up a new door, but I'm going to come to close what we've been talking about. So remember, we were 15,000 left. We were going to close the business down. We were
Uh-huh.
basically broke.
Right.
All right. So that article came out. The date of this article in PC Magazine is September 29th, 1987. Pat and I knew that we wanted to go to Comdex, which was the big convention in Las Vegas every year.
Uh-huh. Oh,
For
yeah.
a whole week.
I've been to that show probably 20 times. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, every year was a Comdex, Computer Dealer Exposition, I think is what it stood for.
Right.
Where all of these companies that had products, you could go and meet the people behind these companies, right? Whether they were hardware or software companies.
Yeah. Right.
So Pat and I, now ACT was released in April 1st, 87. Pat and I knew we wanted to go to the Las Vegas one in November and make the big what's the word I'm looking for? Our big introduction to the market was going to be at
Mhm.
Comdex. That was going to be the big splash. But again, common sense, gut instinct, we said, we don't know what a Comdex looks like. Why don't we go to the junior one held every spring in Atlanta at that time? And so we went to that Comdex to learn what a Comdex looked like. and we were just going to get a little 10 by 10 booth. Okay. Because that's all we could afford, basically. We don't care with our money. So the thing that stood out to Pat and me across the entire April Atlanta Comdex was every booth except one had pedestals with a computer monitor on it, and they had an employee dressed in their company shirt, and you could walk up to them and show me what you got, right? We were not interested in hardware. We were looking at software companies. They would give you a demo, but then somebody else would walk up and ask a question that you already asked, and now that salesperson's focus is on that new person, so we would walk away. We watched this and experienced it, and we said how dumb that is, how expensive it is to have a booth one at a time. You're not going to get the point across one at a time. So I think we got to get a much bigger booth. Okay, so that's how we learned.
Okay, that was insightful.
Yeah, okay, so here's what we did in November. And this has to do with the financial.
So you learned at that show that you got to do one-to-many and that you need to have some space to be able to give people
100%
room to gather.
100%.
And that's more expensive. That's bigger than a 10 by 10, I'm thinking.
We ended up getting an island. So there were 3 aisles around us with 10 by 10 booths. We got an island booth 20 feet wide by 50 feet long. Okay?
There's an investment.
That's 1,000 square
feet. At Comdex? I mean, that's like the biggest, that at Vegas, that's one of the few shows that takes up the whole city.
Yep. It cost us $50,000 for that booth. 50,000, right? It's like, oh my gosh. And the contract that you signed as an exhibitor had many stipulations, one of which was you cannot sell product at the show. Okay. Well,
okay.
All right. So Pat and so what did we do? We ordered 50 to be delivered to the show. 50, we were still Conductor Software at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't change the company name yet. So we ordered 50 conductor chairs. Think of a Hollywood director's chair, the
okay.
chair. It's high, that has the little footstool, right? We ordered 50 of those so that we could have up to 50 people sitting down and do a presentation every hour on the hour. Basically a 45-minute presentation, then leave time for questions and people to talk to, right? I did about 95% of those presentations. Jim, it was a Monday through Friday show, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I kid you not when I say that after the third presentation of day one, every seat was filled. We didn't care if people sat down just the rest of their feet. Because most people still didn't have chairs to sit down on. They still had pedestals. It's like, no.
Right.
So
we were walking for days. It's like, oh, a seat.
Right. So if people sat down, we at least had their attention. But here's the psychological factor we didn't even think about. If you walk by something and there's 50 people sitting down, you might look at a chair. Hey, are there any left for me to sit down on? I'm tired of walking. Or you might also say, but what are they looking at?
Yeah, what are these guys talking about? Maybe I need to listen into this.
You would stand in the aisle. And so we had more people standing in the aisle.
And you got the press coming in, people taking pictures.
We did. We did. Seriously. We had more people standing in the aisle plus the 50 people in the seats. So we were demonstrating anywhere from the third presentation on between, I would say, 100 to 200 people every presentation. That's a lot of people watching what you're doing. We had the little projector and the screen on the back, so I had my computer attached to my laptop, right? Mm-hmm. I was demonstrating my real database, people that I really knew, and I knew a lot about them, and I was showing something real. I had so much credibility.
It wasn't vaporware. It was actually...
Yeah, this is me. And some of those people would come and sit, and I knew them, so I would show them on the screen. I would ask questions of, anyway.
Yeah. So you had the social proof going on.
Exactly, 100% correct. So here's why I told you that story. Coming back to the financial. So one of the 10 by 10 vendors who watched this phenomena all week, when the show was over, Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock, the lights are down, all the people have left, the vendors are shutting down, tearing down their booths. Pat and I, we sold, by the way, even though contractually it said we couldn't. We thought, what are they going to do? Kick us out? We sold 500 copies of it at a show special price for $100. The retail price was $395. But if you bought it here, we'll sell it to you for 100. And so we had 500 copies sold. That was $50,000 we paid for our booth, right?
And back then it was like, it wasn't like it is today where you're on a subscription. Back then you bought the software.
You bought it. Yeah. I mean, here's what I'll show your viewers. Here was the box.
You'd buy it, you'd load it on your computer and it was yours.
Yeah. There was the box.
Yeah. It was like very cool. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And here's the user's manual and here's the diskettes. I mean, so we sold 500 copies of that. And so when Pat and I, we had hit a grand slam home run. Okay.
Yeah.
So we had this PC Magazine article in September, 500 sales sold. We had a number of companies saying we want to distribute this product in my country, and that's how it went international. Right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of going to a big show like that.
Yeah. And so as Pat and I were walking out of it was at the Hilton Hotel at that time.
Yeah. Okay.
As we were walking out of the Hilton Hotel, this 10 by 10 vendor who was by himself in his booth all week ran up to Pat and me excitedly and said, guys, I got to talk to you. I want to buy your company. I've got $1 million cash I can wire transfer to you next week. I want to buy your company. Will you sell it to me? I want it. And we was like, what? It was a very high compliment, but it was like, get lost. Well, he kept persisting. We kept saying no, and he finally left. That guy was Kevin O'Leary.
From Shark Tank.
From Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful.
Mr. Wonderful. Oh my. So he was.
Think about this. Think about this. In that June of that year, right? In 1986, we were about ready to go under. And now in November of 1987, somebody offered us $1 million. Imagine the spectrum of how you were, going to have failure and shut down a business, and now you're offered $1 million, right?
Wow.
There was just some excitement about all of these things that came together based on our DNA, our training, our gut feel, our common sense, good luck, good fortune, good contacts, right? People that helped us, articles written. We knew how to connect.
Your faith.
We were selling a product about something that everybody needed to do a better job of.
Yeah.
We ourselves were doing a better job. Pat and I literally were over the unfolding years, literally had red carpet treatment by the industry. I didn't care if you worked for Microsoft, Intel, it did not matter. Epson printers, compact computer, it didn't matter. Everybody had begun to use our product in one way, shape, or form. But going back to that, automate the automators, here's the other thing that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Within the first 6 months of ACT coming on the market, I went to every laptop manufacturer that I mentioned, Zenith, NEC, Grid, Compaq even. They didn't have a laptop yet, but Compaq, because they did have a mobile sewing machine at least, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And AT&T had a laptop back then, believe it or not, right? And so there was a grand total of across the world of about 10,000 salespeople selling for all of those major manufacturers. I personally trained all of them on ACT.
Wow.
We sold ACT to them at a special price. They did buy it, but at a special reduced price. I trained, they would then schedule regionally and go by country as well, all of their salespeople coming together, and I would fly there and train them on ACT. And now that's how we fulfilled the automate the automators, because they were the guys and gals going out selling these laptops, right? And now they were using something themselves. They had great credibility. They had enthusiasm. Who couldn't use something to know more about everybody you had to deal with in your business, in your life, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's taking the automate the automators idea. It was like you found a population of salespeople who sell a product that everybody uses in the sales field, like a laptop. Everybody's mobile. They're going places. They got their laptop. I mean, they have their desktop computer at their desk, but then when they leave, they've got to use the paper again.
Right.
So
Exactly.
they're like using that. You have to kind of go back and forth between the two different worlds. And it was hell.
Well, think about it.
And
All the managers of all of these laptop salespeople wanted their sales force to sell more laptops, right?
yeah, right.
So
Yeah.
they were very open to a product that helped their salespeople sell more laptops. So the laptop industry and ACT also came together at a very opportune
That
time.
was like a critical, like
It
tipping point
was.
right there.
It was. So
The
so
hardware came up online and it got powerful enough and you could carry it around with you. It was convenient and it actually worked. It was reliable and it would
right.
withstand the pressures of being on the road. And it was a useful thing, right? And
Yeah.
this,
So we think. I mean, it goes two-way street. The laptop enabled ACT in many ways. ACT enabled the laptop in many ways. It was a perfect marriage. Okay. And so we were just at the right place at the right time in time, and desperate, but determined uh, to come up with things. So, you can't say, Jim, that there's this, kind of one single path you choose and, you kind of, you never know what all of the elements and aspects of what it's going to take, good luck and good skills combined, and then even some beyond those, to make something come to life, right?
mm,
And then once it does come to life, what do you do with it? And how do you continue to nurture it and let it grow and grow, fast and efficient and so uh, powerfully,
mm,
and exponentially. We learned as time went on. We just and obviously the company was growing. We were hiring more people. We were getting out more. Right. We just learned these things as they unfolded, in many ways. But we also just had these what I'll call Street Fighter. Pat and me always had and still do this Street Fighter attitude. You don't always listen to the rules. In fact, you discard rules sometimes. You don't go by what everybody else says. And so we just knew we had a confidence to proceed even against the odds. But
mm.
we had growing support in many ways underneath us as that happened that fortified and validated what we were doing. Now, did we make mistakes? Of course we did. I'm kind of just giving you highlights here. I mean, if I told you the whole story of all of this, we'd be
Oh,
on here for, days, right?
right.
But it takes a lot. It's not, things don't happen easily, quickly, or simply. It's the one of the things that I learned myself personally.
Uh-huh.
I said I wasn't trained in marketing, but you realize, against limited or no resources, sometimes you do have more in you that you're not even aware of down in the reservoir of your psyche, your gut, whatever, that you at some point might be forced to go to where you've never been before and never thought you even had to go to before, but you have no options left. So that plane trip home, I've got to think, can we save $20,000? Maybe I can't. How could I? I don't not. It's a tough job coming up with a name, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it happened because I started to think in an area, marketing, that I never had to really think before, in that aspect. And so you sometimes have to force yourself to step out to areas you've never been before and just try. And then once you determine to try, then take some action with it. None of this is rocket science. None of it. There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing I'm telling you that somebody listening can go, yeah, I get that. I see that. But you don't see it that way when you're in the thick of it.
No.
right?
Right.
And or you're trying to produce something that nobody even knows you exist yet, and the odds are hugely against you. Okay, so they are big deal. I still want to try, right? So that's the first element is try, right? I mean, you got to have the thought, but once you have that thought, you got to try.
Mm. So much here, so many nuggets. It's wow.
And that now we're only up to basically the release of X. Imagine the years and years of our having the product before we sold it and all that was learned and experienced at that point. So, in view of your clients, your listeners' time, I mean, I'm happy to go on, but you can see how it's hard to encapsulate so much that was necessary to understand this, from which a global industry, multi-billion-dollar industry was created by two guys who were desperate and just started to put one foot in front of the other, right?
Yeah.
There's a
Oh.
lot more people that can relate to the struggle, the determination,
Mm.
um, the hope. That's why I spend a lot of time talking about these up front, because the rest kind of begins to fall a little bit more quickly in place. Not that they were easy either, and lessons not, that couldn't be learned. There were many. So maybe on a future podcast, I continue from where we left off. But the point is,
Mm.
I
Great.
wanted to provide your listeners and you to really a broad sense of a very concentrated period of time,
Yeah.
on which a lot happened.
Yeah. It's just so inspiring. It's you, the two of you had jobs. You were happy as clams in mud.
We
You
were,
had great jobs. You were at IBM. Pat was at a good company. You
yeah,
guys were doing well, and you
we were,
decided we're gonna get out of this frying pan and jump into the fire.
yeah,
Voluntarily, you did that. You put
absolutely,
yourself in a position to be like completely stressed out, but you took it in the opposite. Your mental approach was, let's do something with this and have fun with it.
yeah. I mean, again, we were so wanting to stay in business together. We did enjoy working together, and the struggle of forming and starting a business with margin maker,
Hmm.
right? Um, and so we didn't
And
want to
Pat
give
had
that
a
up.
family. You had a
I had a
family.
family. Yeah, we didn't want to give that up, Jim. I mean, it was I'm looking for something here. Can't seem to find it, unfortunately. Um, we were looking for something to do together. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was a motivating factor. We depended on each other. We believed in each other, right? Now, there was a lot of um, tragedy that went along with the success that I haven't gotten into yet, that evolved and emerged because of the huge success of ACT. And so, now, so I've told you kind of the journey up toward the peak, and we haven't even gotten to the peak yet, right?
Yeah.
But when we owned it. But during that journey, I also went down into the depths of the valley of tragedy and
Mm.
heartbreak and desperation. And so success comes with a heavy price, a very heavy price, and a lot of people don't talk about that are successful. They just talk about their success.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about, and I do talk about the tragedy of success and what you better be prepared for if you want to begin this journey. I mean, you could die, right? I mean, figuratively, if not literally, but you could figuratively die. Everything that was important to you before is gone, right? And
Mm.
it's your fault, right? That's part of being an entrepreneur.
I'd love to get into that with you. I think we need to wrap it up though for
Yeah,
this time. Maybe we do a
yeah,
second episode. That's fascinating. I'd love to get into that. To finish this up and put a nice little bow on it.
yeah.
You are known from what I've seen to make quotes. Do you have a favorite quote that you could leave us with today?
I do. One of them that comes to mind that I have obviously experienced that will be apropos for what we've shared. It's a quote by, what's his name? I forget his name. He was an 1800 era poet, but this is what he said. And I'm going to say it twice with different tone on words because of the impact of each word. So here it is. Of all. Now think about it. In a total of 2 words, 2 single syllable words, a total of 5 letters, he's already encapsulated all. There's no room for excuse. There's no partial. So here's the quote. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, what might have been. Okay. That goes back to that. You could look at it from either a plus side or a negative side. If only I had treated that person nicer, maybe I would have achieved X, Y, Z. If only I had, done this would have happened, right? If I hadn't have tried, then this wouldn't have occurred, right? So let's say it again. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, what might have been. I don't want to be a person I never have aspired to. I still am in that mindset. Like I said, Pat and I are working on some things together right now.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
I can't talk about, but anyway, we haven't given up trying to continue, because here's another quote. Success should be a springboard and not a hammock, right? So just because you've succeeded here doesn't mean you can now rest on your laurels. If you can achieve that, what's next? Go higher, right? So, but going back to the first quote, starting a company or having started a company, if that's where your listener might be, it's a scary thing. In today's world, it's a scary thing. One tweet can destroy your company, can destroy your reputation. We didn't have that back then, right? But it exists today. You can be blacklisted. I mean, we know what's going on in the world today without naming anything, regardless of what side you're on. You can be destroyed quickly. And so being in business, especially a small business entrepreneur, whether you grow to be a huge company or not, immaterial, it's a scary thing. But yet, if you don't try, you'll never know. And I'm the mindset, as is Pat and many entrepreneurs out there, I might fail. Chances are I will fail, but doggone it, I'm going to try. I just got to prove it to myself if I can or can't do it. I kind of consider myself, think of it as a Navy SEAL mentality, right? I'm going to be brutalized in the, Hell Week and all that because I got to make it. But man, if I make it, I'm the elite of the elite, right? I am prepared. I can conquer. I can achieve. I can do things that most people can't. I want to have that kind of capability and mindset and attitude such that that's where I end up my life when that point in time comes. And I look back on it in that microsecond or, whatever, if God willing. But I don't want to give up. I have one life. I want to make the most of it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike Muhney, for spending some time with me today on the show.
Well, thank you so much for the extra time you've given me and all the listening you've done and your listeners as well. So thank you very much. I truly am honored and enjoyed it.
Ah, very good. Me too. Thank you.
Okay.